So I'm Jenna Lopez. I'm the research coordinator for the Recognizing Critical Expertise project at the Center for Research and Education on Violence Against Women and Children. On behalf of our research team and the Learning Network team, I'm pleased to welcome everyone to today's webinar. Recognizing Critical Expertise, a knowledge and skills framework for intimate partner violence specialists. I'm located in the municipality of Clarington, which is situated within the traditional and treaty territory of the Mississaugas and Chippewas of the Anishinaabe, known today as the Williams Treaties First Nation. I'm honored to welcome Elders Mary and Dan Smoke to open our webinar today.
Hey, bonjour. Where I come from, when we greet one another, we say bonjour, which means hello, it's a friendly greeting. So bonjour.
Bonjour.
Asanyenas kwe and Dajnakas, Makwa Dodam, Bachwanabe Dunjaba. My spirit name is Shooting Star Woman. I'm Bear Clan, and I originally come from Bachwanabe, Ontario, which is on beautiful Lake Superior. And I'm very honored to share some of the teachings that I've learned throughout my lifetime. My mom went to residential school, so we didn't grow up traditionally. We grew up off the land, living off the land and getting fresh fish from Lake Superior. But we didn't know about culture and tradition. So I learned that because I had this desire to learn that. So I've been in school my whole life learning. And I've found out that our people had always had gender equity. And so we always respected the women because the women are the life givers. The women carry the fire inside. And so the men always respected that. So when the non-native community came over here, they had rules and ways of treating their women. And one of their rules was called the rule of thumb. So that was that if you had to discipline your wife, you could beat her with a stick or a board, but it couldn't be any bigger than your thumb. So some men have, huge hands. You can imagine the damage that could be done with a weapon that size, but they could not be charged if it was within the limits of the size of their thumb. So they brought that over here, and our people eventually learned about violence against their partners. And so this is something that has to be unlearned. And so we're very honored to help with this conference today. And I'm going to let my husband introduce himself before we sing an opening song.
Chimigrach Marilu, Asanyenas, Indishnakas, Kildare, Dodam, Six Nations, Grand River, Dinjiba. My name is Dan Smoke, Asanyenas. I'm a member of the Seneca Nation, a member of the Kildare family, the Kildare clan. And I come from Six Nations, Grand River territory. I'm very happy to be here, and I'm glad to be able to help and start us off in the right way.
Yes. Okay, we're going to sing a song that honors the women. Our mother is our first teacher. When we come out into the world, she teaches us how to eat, how to walk, how to talk, how to play, how to get dressed. She teaches us everything, and so we always honor her. In this song, the words say that the woman teaches the children about culture and tradition, and she also teaches them how to take care of Mother Earth. away, hiya, oh, will, hey, ya, hey, oh. Anishinaabe, Kwemi no Mindodem, Kwemi no Mindodem, Akina Minawe, oh ya, away, hiya, oh, will, hey, ya, hey, oh. Oh, Matakwasa. I just said Matakwasa, and that means all my relations in the Lakota language. I am 5 parts Ojibwe, 1 part Lakota, 1 part Mi'kmaq, 1 part French. So I just know very little about a lot of my nations, and I know more about my Anishinaabe nation. But I've been married to Dan for almost 50 years, so I know a lot more about the Iroquois nation. So I'm going to let Dan have the opportunity to share in this prayer that is supposed to be said before all things, all other things. And it comes from the Iroquois people, and it's called the Thanksgiving Address.
Oh, Nyawe, Chimigwech Marilu. And Chimigwech for that beautiful song.
Oh.
Good way to start the webinar off. Yes, Nyawe, Sagwan Dizo, Sanio, Esquatahas, Kitkontanwa, Wahase, Jawise Dodakwa, Uskada Nagohas, Uida Denahas. Grandfather, grandmother, hear our sacred thoughts, hear our sacred prayers as we bring our good minds and our good intentions into the circle this afternoon. We always begin by speaking about this beautiful Wanish Leo, this beautiful day that we've been blessed with to use in a good way. And it's a little bit of a thermal shock, but it's still a good day for most all of creation. So we just want to acknowledge grandfather, grandmother, the water, the lifeblood of our mother, the earth, all the life that lives in her, all the life that lives on her, because the water is that feminine sacred element of life that all creation needs in order to survive. And she is still following her sacred instructions in providing that life to all creation, grandfather, grandmother, so be it in our minds.
Uh-huh.
We also want to give greetings, give thanks to our Mother Earth. Our Mother Earth is that other feminine sacred element of life that all creation needs in order to survive. All the life that lives in her and all the life that lives on her. The crawlers, the four-leggeds, the two-leggeds, us human beings, the plants, the medicines, the rocks, the minerals, the trees, all the life that lives in the trees and all the life that lives on the trees, the flyers, for they are all part of an interdependent, interconnected, interrelated life support system that continues to take care of our Mother the Earth and who our Mother the Earth takes care of in return. So we want to acknowledge grandfather, this Father Sky. Our Father Sky is that masculine element of life that all creation needs in order to survive. He represents the air. And that air, he breathes in that life into all creation, for nothing would survive without our Father Sky. And he's still following his sacred instructions, grandfather, grandmother, so be it in our minds.
Uh-huh.
We also want to acknowledge our eldest brother, the sun, who's already begun his journey across the sky. Every day he travels from the eastern door across to the western door, and he travels across the sky. And when he shows his face to us, he provides us with heat and he provides us with light because he represents fire, the fire of life. We just want to acknowledge, grandfather, grandmother, that our eldest brother, the sun, is still following his sacred instructions because nothing would survive without our eldest brother, the sun. So we have a lot of fires going on a day like today, don't we? Anyways, we want to acknowledge also grandfather, grandmother, our grandmother moon. We are now in the time of the spirit moon, which began showing her face on Monday. We just want to acknowledge this grandmother moon is a special time because when she shows her face, she's looking after all female life. Plus, she's also taking care of the water. She actually recycles the water. She purifies the water. So she's cleaning the water. So we want to acknowledge that our grandmother moon is still following her sacred instructions. She's still that life support system that we need, grandfather, grandmother. And so it's really nice when the grandmothers are able to go out and give thanks to her. We were taught by the Creator, by the Sky Woman, in our creation story, we were taught that if we want any form of life to continue to come back, to repopulate, and to have a strong gene pool when it comes back, then all we have to do is give thanks. So that's why we, as Haudenosaunee people, we have 8 major ceremonies, and we just got finished the midwinter ceremony, which was 2 Fridays ago, and that was a ceremony in which we have now passed the exact middle of the winter solstice. It usually follows after the winter solstice begins, the first new moon, 5 days after that first new moon. And then that's the exact middle. And we know that because the stars remind us about that. So I just want to acknowledge the stars, the star relatives. They remind us when it's time for us to conduct our ceremonies of Thanksgiving. So we just want to acknowledge grandfather, grandmother, that we still have people in our communities who can read the star knowledge, who understand and recite the star knowledge to the people. And so we have an idea as well as agricultural people, the Haudenosaunee, we want to know what the next harvest is going to be like. It's good to know that so that we can plan for it. So the stars tell us, it gives us a good idea of what to expect in this next harvest. And then for those hunter-gatherers like Mary Lou's people, the Algonquian language family, they would like to know what the hunt is going to be like. So what are the forests going to be like? How do we help the forests so that the hunt is going to be a good hunt? Because right now, our Mother Earth is sleeping because in the last cycle of creation, she provided us with a good hunt and with a good harvest. So we just want to acknowledge that she needs her rest right now. So that's why she's sleeping underneath her sheet of leaves and her blanket of snow. So right now it's good to see the snow out there. And that's why when we talk about the next part of this Thanksgiving, we talk about the thunder beings. The thunder beings are the ones who wake up and shake up creation, usually around the time of the thunder moon, February, March. And then throughout the cycle of spring, summer, and fall, they bring the purifying rains that cleanse and purifies Mother Earth and also gives her a drink. So the thunder beings have a very important responsibility. But when it's time for Mother Earth to go to sleep, get ready to get her rest, then the thunder beings go home back to the western door, through the western door. And that's why we don't hear from them through the winter solstice, because they know that our Mother Earth needs her sleep. So they will come back again though when comes the thunder moon, which is usually February, March, which is usually accompanied by the arrival of the maple sap, the very first medicine that comes from our Mother Earth, and also by the awakening from hibernation of the bears, the Makwa. So we want to acknowledge grandfather, grandmother, that there's a rhythm, there's a cycle throughout all of this cycle of creation that we are now going to be entering into. So we just want to acknowledge grandfather, grandmother, that the 4 protectors, they are the 4 celestial beings who look after all spiritual matters. The 4 celestial beings look after our spirit helpers. We call them angels. We call them spirit helpers. We have different names according to our different faiths and cultures around Mother Earth, but we all have those spirit helpers. And those spirit helpers help us with our good minds. They help us with our belief system, with our faith, and they help us to make good decisions. And oftentimes they communicate to us through our intuitive side of our being, not through our ego side, but through our intuitive side. And if we listen, we can hear them telling us the truth. And they never mislead us. They never misrepresent us. They always express the truth to us so that we will be better human beings. So grandfather, grandmother, we just want to acknowledge the 4 protectors and the work that they do with Sagwell Dizon, Kijamanado, the creator, the maker of our bodies. And lastly, we acknowledge Creator, Sagwantizo, Miigwech, Gijaminado, for everything that she does for us and providing everything here. Everything we need is right here. For those of us here in the Great Lakes watershed, we'd just like to welcome everyone to this territory, the land of the Attawandaron people, the land of the Chippewas of the Thames, the Munsee Delaware Nation, the Haudenosaunee people. We have a mixture of hunter-gatherers and farmers who have coexisted here for several generations. And we just want to acknowledge that's according to the Dish with One Spoon Treaty, a treaty that basically says, keep it clean, keep the Great Lakes watershed clean, take only that which you need. Before, at one time, it was teeming with beaver, amok. There was beaver everywhere, and there was enough beaver here to feed everybody. But now we only take that which we need. We can't take that which we want, because we want to make sure that everyone gets fed. No one goes hungry. And lastly, of the Dish with One Spoon, it says that we are supposed to check in on one another, take care of each other, much like COVID is teaching us how to look after one another and just see how the elders are doing. Make sure that they need everything, they get everything that they need. If they need anything, then it's up to us to help them out. So we know that because we are the beneficiaries of many brothers and sisters, relatives who help us. And I'm talking about people from all backgrounds, people from all faiths, races of man, red, white, yellow, black. We have them all coming to help us. So we are very, very grateful people. We're so happy that the Dish with One Spoon is being honored in that way. Mm-hmm. Grandfather, grandmother, so be it in their minds. So in the spirit of our ancestors, we say Miigwech, Yahweh, all my relations, Daneto, Hai Hai.
Now we'll turn it back over
to Jenna. Yes.
Thank you so much to Elders Mary Lou and Dan Smoke for starting us off today. That was wonderful. Thank you. I'm pleased to introduce you now to today's speakers. We have Linda Baker, who is a psychologist, adjunct professor, and the learning director of the Center for Research and Education on Violence Against Women and Children in the Faculty of Education at Western University. She is proud to lead the Learning Network and the Knowledge Hub. She has over 20 years experience in the mental health and justice system, working with and learning from children, youth, and families dealing with experiences of violence and trauma. Katrina Scott is a psychologist, professor, and academic director at the Center for Research and Education on Violence Against Women and Children at Western University. Dr. Scott leads an applied research program aimed at ending violence in family relationships, with specific expertise on addressing violence perpetration in men. She is known for her research on empirically and ethically sound policies and practices for intervening with men who have used violence against their partners and children. And Angelique Jenny is an associate professor and the Woods Holmes Research Chair in Children's Mental Health in the Faculty of Social Work at the University of Calgary. Woods Holmes is a multi-service, nonprofit children's mental health care center. Dr. Jenny has over 20 years experience in intervention and prevention services within the child protection, children's mental health, and violence against women sectors. I will now turn it over to Dr. Linda Baker.
Thank you, Jenna, for helping us get started today and for your introductions. We are excited to welcome you all to this webinar. The webinar is about the work we've been doing with our collaborators from across Canada over the past 2 years. The research project is called Recognizing Critical Expertise, a knowledge and skills framework for intimate partner violence. Throughout this presentation, we'll be referring to intimate partner violence as IPV. The funding, for which we are grateful, that supported this work was provided by Women and Gender Equality Canada, better known to many as WAGE. Like any wise research leads, the first thing we did was assemble a talented research team. They are with us today, just as they have worked alongside us throughout every step of this project. This dynamic team included the project manager, Anna Lee, the research coordinator, Jenna Lopez, who you've met, who opened our webinar, and 4 research assistants, Diamond Entry Mensa, Olivia Cullen, Kara Jones, and Nicole Peach. We set 3 objectives for today's webinar. First, we hope everyone here learns about the knowledge and skills framework for IPV specialists that we've collaboratively developed. Part of that learning will come from gaining an understanding of the critical process involved in building the framework, as well as how it may continue to grow in the future. That is the life of the framework beyond this project. Finally, we aim to explore the commonalities in the core knowledge, skills, and values of IPV specialists working with women and children survivors and men who have behaved abusively. To provide some context, I'm going to start with some background about knowledge and skills frameworks in general. Frameworks like the one we're presenting today have been developed in many different areas of practice and in many parts of the world. In fact, we were inspired by frameworks developed in Australia and New Zealand. So what do such frameworks have in common at an overarching level? For example, what would a knowledge skills framework for community health practitioners, say sports physiotherapists and a tragic response team of survivors, of service providers, what would they all have in common? Because we know they would have lots of differences. Well, first, they would all focus on the knowledge, understanding, and skills of the service provider group that they are designed for. Second, they would all emphasize the knowledge and skills of the person directly providing support, rather than on specific programs, tools, or services. And that's so important. I'm just gonna re-emphasize that. The knowledge and skills of the individual providing support. Third, knowledge and skill frameworks are often developed through a consensus process where experts come together, they share what they know, think, and do in their work, and then engage in methods that lead to agreement and documentation of the expertise. The result? A knowledge and skills framework that is relevant to the workforce capability of specialists. And for this project, that means intimate partner violence specialists, or those who provide services to adult and child survivors of IPV, as well as to those who behave abusively. Collaboratively developing a knowledge and skills framework requires a substantial investment of the time and energy of a large number of IPV specialists. And we were embarking on this work during a pandemic. And to our disbelief and dismay, we are winding down this work during yet another wave of the pandemic. So before we asked Canadian experts to invest their time, we carefully considered what would be the potential advantages of articulating and documenting the expertise of IPV specialists. I'm going to share some of those advantages with you now. IPV specialists have a clear understanding of the skills and knowledge needed in their work. This specialized expertise has been developed over time by the specialists themselves, and importantly, alongside those with lived experience of IPV. However, these knowledge and skills are not generally written down. We believe that articulating the knowledge and skill sets needed for IPV work is key to it being fully recognized as a specialization that resides in communities and within community-based organizations that provide IPV services. Recognition as a specialization will also lead to increased recognition of the expertise of IPV specialists by other systems and system players, such as the justice and legal system, health and mental health systems, just to name a couple. Another advantage of documenting the expertise of this sector, it helps us articulate what organizational, community, and structural supports IPV specialists need in order to have the capacity to grow and express their knowledge and skills. Also, a framework like this can be an important step in developing common understandings that go far beyond a common language. And common understandings can facilitate networking, break down silos, and result in services that consistently center the needs of individuals accessing IPV services. Finally, such a framework can also lead to more effective recruitment of new service providers and can improve and support training initiatives. With this project, we aim to bring together IPV service providers, the experts from across Canada, in collaborative working groups to articulate and document the knowledge and skills of IPV specialists. We use the term IPV specialists to refer to individuals who deliver services, train and supervise others, and review practices within the IPV sector. These specialists respond to and provide services to women and child survivors of IPV, as well as men who have behaved abusively. Examples of IPV specialists include advocates who support and work with women and children in shelters or community agencies, providers of services to support children who have experienced IPV, and facilitators of services for men who have behaved abusively towards their partners and children, and individual teams within larger organizations who are the go-to specialists for IPV. The development of this framework was informed by three key starting assumptions. First, the skill sets for this work lie in specialist service providers. That is, that IPV specialists hold knowledge, understanding, and skills needed to do this work. Further, this IPV specialist expertise is survivor-led and centered in intersectional approaches. This fundamental assumption guided the selection of our IPV experts, and thanks to the leadership and knowledge of the expert working groups, the knowledge and skills in the framework articulate what being survivor-led, anti-racist and anti-oppressive, and intersectional actually mean in practice. Second, we assumed that IPV specialists have a clear understanding of the skills and knowledge needed in their work, and that this knowledge largely lies within the minds and hearts of specialists, and that the critical knowledge they hold within themselves is not generally written down. And as you can imagine, this potentially creates a vulnerability for the sector. Now, if you're an IPV specialist, I want you to think about how you learn to do what you do. If that expertise largely resides within IPV specialists, then we assumed further that given the expertise is not written down, that many of your skills were likely developed on the job. For instance, through job shadowing and peer mentoring. While very valuable, dependence on the-job skill development places a significant training burden on already overstretched organizations. We also assumed there is a limited number of IPV specialists across Canada, and you're likely to have more difficulty accessing a specialist in some areas, such as rural, northern, and culturally diverse settings. This brings us to our third starting assumption. We knew that this work needed to be done collaboratively with many voices, with survivors, and with the field. We partnered with Women at the Center to bring more survivor expertise into our working groups, and we sought experts doing the work from every province and territory. Finally, we believed it was not clear to what extent experts from different regions, provinces, and territories would agree on what IPV specialists understand, know, and do. Nor did we know if the level of agreement would differ for different aspects of the work. For example, would there be more agreement around the specialist knowledge and skills when it comes to supporting and collaborating with survivors, and less agreement around intervening to end abusive behavior? In summary, these starting assumptions were key drivers for who we brought together, what we did, and how we did it. And now we're delighted to bring you a short video featuring some of the dedicated experts who collaborated on this project, talking about the process of developing the framework. And when the video's finished, Angelique's going to begin the next section of our presentation.
This framework was developed in collaboration with workers across Canada, covering all aspects of the field, including working with women survivors, men who have harmed, and children who have experienced or witnessed violence.
Together with the expert working group members, we've identified 9 areas of knowledge and skills specific to IPV work, which you will find highlighted in this framework.
My favorite part about this project has been getting to know people from all across Canada and to see how we all work so similarly across geographic areas.
After over 17 years in the field, I had the opportunity to speak and to meet so many diverse people across this country doing this work. It was exciting and hopeful, and finding a common language and finding where we were different and meeting again and again and building relationships. I felt like I was part of a movement, and it's given me more hope and optimism than I've had since starting this work.
I'm really so grateful and excited to be a part of this project, because this is the message I think we need to get to men more than anything else, is the fact that they actually have a choice about their behavior.
I love that this framework has been pulled together to really provide a brief snapshot of what it is that we're doing when we're in this field of interpersonal violence. And I love that it really outlines and breaks it down to help us understand the skills and knowledge needed to do the work.
Je suis également très fière du travail qui a été fait par tous les groupes d'experts, parce que ça nous a permis en fait de mettre en mots des pratiques qu'on fait dans notre quotidien.
One of the most valuable experiences I had in working on this project was being introduced to and working with other men's programs from across Canada. For the last 35 years, I've worked in isolation with my own organization and agency, and it was an opportunity to see the vast array of programs that are out there and the variety of ways in which people are thinking about doing this work, and the common ground that was found in the development of the project.
So I hope, I really hope that this project can be presented to all part of Canada, and we can come up with some solution and a real solution to provide, some transformation around intimate partner violence.
Thank you, Linda. So who did come together in all of this for the last few years? More than 70 experts in the IPV sector, including those with lived experience expertise, service providers, and academics, came together from every province and territory in Canada to develop this framework. Working group members were identified as having expertise by their community, either because of their years of service and reputation as a go-to person for training and mentorship, or because of their role in representing service providers in the area. As you can see by this map, we had our three, there we go. As we can see by this, there are 3 expert working groups which were formed, including those with expertise regarding IPV work with women survivors, infants, children, and youth who've experienced violence, and the third group was those who worked with men who have behaved abusively. Of the 71 experts who collaborated on this framework, 31 had expertise. As you can see, working with women, 16 working with children, and 25 with the men's group. Now here is the map of Canada. As you can see, we wanted this to be a national project with collaboration amongst experts from every province and territory, and this map shows that we were successful in engaging with individuals and experts who do this work across Canada. We also asked people when we came together how many years of experience they had working with each service user group. And as you can see, and we were amazed ourselves by the years and years of knowledge and skills the experts had. As you can see, 802 years for those who work with women and survivors, children who've experienced violence. We had almost 600 years, and men who have behaved abusively. When you put it all together and consider that we had almost 1,900 collective years of knowledge combined when we put all 3 groups and brought all 3 working groups together. We also wanted to illustrate with this slide that the locations where experts on this project live and work and where the different service user populations reside. As you can see, we had a wide range of voices spanning large, medium, and small centers, as well as rural areas. We also had experts who were part of provincial associations or First Nations organizations who represented large areas that included varying population sizes. Experts were asked to share, in their own words, which racial and ethnic groups they identified with. This slide shows the results. Experts identified as Afro-Caribbean, Southeast Asian, South Asian East Indian, Black African, Latin American, and Indigenous, including Cree, Saulteaux, Métis, Mi'kmaq, and First Nations. Many folks identified as biracial, and just over half identified as white. We also asked participants to identify themselves around their current sexual orientations and gender identities. A large quantity of experts identified as women, while others identified as men or non-binary. Many of the experts identified as heterosexual, but there was also representation from folks identifying as bisexual, asexual, queer, pansexual, and questioning or unsure. We also asked those experts to identify whether or not they identified as a survivor of gender-based violence. And as you can see, we had a very even split between those who identified as survivors and those who did not. So now I'm going to talk about the how. And as the diagram that you're looking at shows that together with expert working group members, we developed this framework by integrating results of this larger project. So a scoping review, interviews with IPV specialists and survivors, consensus building methods, and many collaborative expert working group meetings and workshops over the course of 2 years. So we began the development of the framework with a scoping review. And what this means is that the research team sought both academic and practice-based literature. Practice-based literature is materials that IPV specialists use to guide their work, like practice guidelines and training manuals. This range of documents spoke to and described what IPV specialists need to know, think, and be able to do in providing services. We reviewed 140 publications, which we analyzed in detail to come up with an initial set of 45 categories, which we then broke down into items and domains of knowledge and skill. These items and domains were shared with the expert working group members through a series of 8 Delphi method surveys, and this is a consensus building research method, and it allowed experts to provide their in-depth review and feedback on the items. Additionally, we conducted individual interviews with 62 expert working group members from this project. In those interviews, service providers described in their own words, using case examples, how they did their work and how they what they looked for when they wanted to hire people to replace them, and what the real requirements were to do this work on the front line. We then took all of that information, consolidated, refined, and finalized this understanding of IPV specialist knowledge and skills in 10 meetings, each ranged from 1 to 3 hours long, where we shared drafts with one another, discussed and refined the way that we were talking, the language that we used to describe these items and domains. And we refined them even further into knowledge and skills items and categories that felt that fit for everyone. And a better way to hear a little bit more about the process of how the framework was developed is hearing from the experts themselves. So once again, I'm going to show a little video clip about the experts talking about the process for them, and then Katrina is going to come on and finish by talking about and illustrating the framework itself.
Research tells us that the quality of the responses that people receive after experiencing violence and abuse greatly impacts their recovery. People who receive responses that are supportive, when they're believed, when their safety is held as important, recover quickly. This framework not only has the possibility to inform how we can better respond to victims, survivors of violence, but also how we can respond to the people choosing to use violence and abuse.
Our framework identifies and provides tools for IPV specialists in supporting those individuals affected by abuse and violence in their relationships.
This framework is important to validate the critical work done by this sector. Having the framework outlines our knowledge and skills in a way that facilitates training in our field to help shape those who do this work in the future.
The framework will be valuable tools for the struggles against intimate partner violence with men from diverse culture, background, social economic status, and educational status. It is also amazingly effective in providing services centers in Indigenous culture and identities, which in turn it's a contribution to an anti-colonialist struggle, which is also a core aspect of intimate partner violence.
So I really feel that IPV specialists that work here in Canada, especially those that work with children, can really benefit from this framework because it's packed with information that helps us better understand what this work is all about, the tools and the skills needed to do this work. And I'm excited as it's coming out because this really is something that we don't have in existence at this point. And so this is really, really an exciting thing for those of us that are already in the field to be able to see as new people are coming into these roles, as a framework that they can utilize and use for their work?
Ce projet-là va vraiment servir à tous les professionnels, qu'on soit jeunes professionnels ou professionnels expérimentés, puisque c'est vraiment une mise en commun de tous les savoirs de plusieurs experts qui travaillent avec tous les acteurs impliqués en violence conjugale. Donc, c'est vraiment un plus d'aller lire ce document-là et de prendre connaissance des compétences et des connaissances qui se retrouvent dans ce document-là.
And the more prepared you are as an IPV specialist, the more you can help someone. And it's very hard when you leave a relationship because you're constantly looking for the right kind of help and you don't even know what you need. And so to have experts have the tools to be able to work with you and make you feel like a real person and be empathetic and caring, that to me is what all this framework is about. And I just think this is important work, and I'm very blessed to be part of it.
Thank you very much, Angelique, and thank you for those words. I now get the very exciting job of telling you about what this collaborative group of people have developed together. And like others, I just want to start by saying how grateful I am for all the time and expertise shared by our working group members from across the country, and also how proud I am of what we've produced. This is the flourishing practice model. We chose a flower as a visual representation of this framework. Each part of the flower, the core, the leaves, and the petals, represent different areas of knowledge and skills needed for IPV specialists' work. The entire framework is supported by the STEM, which represents the critical roles that organizations need to play in making it possible for IPV service providers to develop the knowledge and skills that we outline. The STEM recognizes that individual service providers can't do it alone. In order to develop expertise, there needs to be leadership on things like anti-racist and anti-oppressive practice, and high-level commitment to collaboration, recognizing the need to work across services for survivors, including child survivors and those who've behaved abusively. Organizations also need to recognize the unique needs of children and youth with appropriate materials and spaces. And they need to have sufficient staffing and support for people to do the difficult work of being an IPV specialist. These aspects of organizations and others support the development of expertise in service providers in the sector, like a stem holds up a flower. So now that I've talked a little bit about the stem of the flower and what it represents, what I'm going to do is zoom in and provide a very brief overview of the other areas of the flourishing practice framework. And I want to tell you something. When we started this work, we were very excited about bringing together service providers who work with survivors, children, and those who behaved abusively, but we weren't sure how much agreement, as Linda said, that we were going to have between groups. It turned out that there was a lot. In the next parts of what I'm going to talk about, all of it applies to IPV specialists equally, regardless of whether or not they're working with survivors, children, or men who behaved abusively. This first common area across all IPV specialists is represented by the core. This is the central knowledge and skills needed to work in ways that put the experiences, identities, and strengths of those seeking services at the center of all of the work. We identified 4 areas of knowledge and skills that are necessary to practice in a way that centers service users. First, IPV specialists need to be able to uphold the diverse and intersecting identities and cultures of those who've experienced and perpetrate violence. For example, IPV specialists know that different people experience violence differently, and that IPV specialist work cannot be done without a strong foundational capacity to apply an intersectional lens to the work. Recognizing and amplifying strengths in response to violence is a second part of this core. This section refers to the capacity to recognize and value the fact that service users are experts of their own lives, and they respond to violence in ways that signify wisdom, strength, and resiliency. The actively decolonize practice section, which is next, recognizes that to provide IPV specialist services, it's necessary to work in ways where IPV specialists have knowledge of colonization, that they're able to provide strength-based services that center Indigenous cultures and identities, and that they commit within themselves to anti-colonization. And finally, part of the core of our framework is the knowledge and skills held by IPV specialists in working in trauma and violence-informed ways with a deep understanding and appreciation of the impact of abuse. Now we're going to zoom back out and start talking about another part of the flower, the leaves. The leaves of our flower represent aspects of knowledge and skill that underlie the work of IPV specialists. And these are also areas of expertise that are shared by all specialists, regardless of the population that they're working with. And as I talk to you a little bit more about the leaves, I'm going to use this as an opportunity to give you a sense of the depth and breadth of the framework we've developed. So this is one of the leaves of the framework, which is to collaborate across systems. So here in this leaf, like in other parts of the framework, the area of knowledge and skills is broken down into a number of specific items. In the case of collaboration, some of the specific items include being able to collaborate with others to manage risk and promote safety, understand and promote the value of community-based responses, establish, develop, and maintain cross-agency relationships that work from a survivor-focused lens, and guard against reproducing oppression in the context of collaboration with others. There are more items. This section of the framework also covers having knowledge of a range of different types of services, such as those related to basic needs, immigration, separation and divorce, and mental and physical health, and the skills of being able to effectively make referrals and promote collaboration and coordination of services. Each of the areas that I talk about today can be broken down like this into somewhere between 5 and 15 specific items. For example, the area of centering diverse and intersecting identities and cultures that I talked about just a minute ago has 10 different specific items included in it. And each of those items are then that breakdown of the knowledge and skills required in each area. Another leaf in the framework is navigate laws and ethics. And for this leaf, I'm going to zoom in again, but in a different way. As I said, each part of the framework includes a number of specific items. And one of the items under the navigate laws and ethics sections is document in ways that accurately reflect the dynamics of abuse. For each of these items, what our working groups did was created detailed descriptions of what does it mean, what does it look like to have and apply this knowledge and skill. For example, this item on documentation starts with a general description of how IPV specialists keep documentation in ways that prioritize dignity and safety, while also balancing the duty to preserve evidence for legal purposes. As the item continues, it details different ways and different considerations for documentation with different groups. For example, the item talks about how when documenting victimization, IPV specialists use language that does not blame victims, but highlights survivors' resistance and reveals their entrapment. For IPV specialists documenting abuse perpetration, documentation focuses on the behaviors of the person who has behaved abusively. And documentation uses language that highlights risks posed by that person and also areas of change. When documenting the experience of children exposed to IPV specialists use language that highlights children's resistance and the short and long-term impacts of abuse. And further, and I think this is a really good example of how the expertise of our working group members came to be and got built in, is that thought about, well, wait a second, in documenting with children, another consideration is that children may eventually read their own documents as they get older. And so what does that mean? And how then do you need to document? There are two other leaves of the framework, and I'm not going to cover them in as much detail. But briefly, the engage in advocacy leaf outlines the way that IPV specialists, regardless of who they're working with, identify systemic gaps in policies, programs, and services, and the ways in which they raise their voices to prompt recognition and elimination of gender-based violence. The final leaf, maintain empathy through reflexive practice and self-care, represents the knowledge that bearing witness to and taking action against violence, abuse, and trauma can be emotionally challenging for IPV specialists, especially when such work is done within a system that fails to recognize and respond in a socially just way to intimate partner violence and intersecting systems of oppression. I'll also mention that this was likely the most difficult part of the framework for our expert working group members to talk about. I think because it was focused on the people providing the service rather than centering the service users as shown in the core of our framework. Though in the end, the group did decide that these reflexive and self-care skills were critical to maintaining a strong workforce. Okay, so we've now covered the stem, that inner core, and the leaves. I'm now going to turn to another part of the framework and another key skill of IPV specialists, which is recognizing, assessing, and communicating risk. And this is represented in what we kind of call the outer core of our flower. This is the first area where we started to see both commonality and specialization in knowledge and skills, depending on the area of IPV specialization. So this core part of the framework, the ring part, represents the sector-wide fundamentals of recognizing, assessing, and communicating risk and safety. This is knowledge and skills held regardless of whether or not IPV specialists are working with women survivors, infants, children, and youth who've experienced or been exposed to IPV, or men who've engaged in abusive behaviors. And an example of the kinds of items included here are things like IPV specialists have deep knowledge of risk and protective factors. They understand that risk and safety are individual, intersectional, and dynamic. They understand and value working together, knowing that sharing information leads to better assessment and practice. The little triangles that extend out from this circle represent the aspects of recognizing, assessing, and communicating risk that differed depending on whether or not IPV specialists were working with children, with women survivors, or men who behaved abusively. These areas were specialized skills that weren't held equally by everybody in the sector, and they were specific to the population people were working with. I'm going to talk about them a little. They ended up being covered in the petals, which is what I'm going to talk about next. So the petals of the flourishing practice framework are not all the same. Here is where we have different colors, and we in fact have different and specialized knowledge and skill depending on the population that the IPV specialist was working with. So those petals are there, and the representation is there because we saw them as growing from and out of the commonality in all other parts of the framework. So I'm going to just zoom in and tell you a little bit about each of those petals. The first one I'll talk about is support and collaborate with survivors. This petal represents the knowledge and skills in this part of the framework. But here, the knowledge and skills and the conversations were so in-depth and detailed and nuanced and large that rather than have, that we actually had to create another different grouping. So here, these labels do not represent individual items, but rather a cluster of knowledge and skills. So for example, the first area, collaborate with and support survivors in considering risk and promoting safety, has a number of different items under it, and then a number of different discussions. And so, for example, in this area, we had in-depth, nuanced, and complex discussions about a range of skills, including, for example, how to have discussions with survivors about ways of responding to violence and abuse that might influence her risk and safety. Also included in this petal are the knowledge and skills held by IPV specialists for promoting self-determination and empowerment in survivors. And so this would include conversations as well about supporting survivors as mothers. Finally, our working groups had some complex and interesting discussions about responding to the complexity of co-occurring substance use in survivors and how IPV specialists work through and with this. What I'm showing you now is the recognize and respond to infant, child, and youth experiences of violence area. And it similarly highlights a number of clusters of skills that IPV specialists who work with younger people use to provide a supportive response. It includes being able to consider and manage risk factors to promote safety for children, recognizing children's experiences of IPV, collaborating to support children, and understanding and responding to trauma and violence in children. In this section, or as we got to this section, our working group members had really in-depth discussion of the need to recognize children's experiences and to be able to recognize and document the specific and unique ways that children are impacted. So for example, recognizing that children are impacted by abuse of their caregivers and also that they have independent developmental impact. Also important in our discussions were the skills, the practices required to listen to and respect children's voices, and the ways in which IPV specialists are able to create safety for children to make disclosures, to appreciate and reflect strengths in the ways that children respond to abuse. Finally, I'll tell you a little bit about our final petal, which is intervene to end abusive behavior. Again, there are a number of clusters of skills that we were talking about, including managing risk and promoting safety, changing abusive behavior, recognizing and addressing denial, blame, and minimization, and addressing fathering. Here as well, discussions were complex and detailed. They included how IPV specialists who work with men who've behaved abusively partner and communicate with organizations supporting survivors. How IPV specialists engage and join with men to amplify their own discomfort about their abusive behaviors and actions. We talked about how to promote change and healing, recognizing that concurrent problems such as trauma and substance use can escalate abusive behavior in those whose choices are already influenced by unhelpful ideas about gender. And our final set of items on addressing fathering represented our group's belief that fathers' abuse of children, mothers, is a parenting choice and children's needs need to be addressed in terms of conversations with men who behaved abusively. Okay, so I'm going to zoom out once more and talk about one final part of the flourishing practice model, and that's the blank petals. We included blank petals in this framework, recognizing that our work and that this framework is incomplete. The current work focused on heteronormative relationships, on women and children survivors, and on abuse in those identifying as male. Our working groups recognize that there's still a lot of work to be done. There are also many forms of gender-based violence aside from IPV, for example, sexual abuse, that we didn't cover in this work. Although there is a foundation within the core of the model for centering diverse and intersecting identities, our working groups were clear that deeper exploration and development of knowledge and skills are needed to address violence in 2SL LGBTQIA+ relationships, in Black individuals and communities, with newcomer, immigrant, and refugee communities, to address IPV in older Canadians, or to support individuals with disabilities. Also not included so far in this framework is prevention work. These blank petals represented in this framework are a place to grow these areas. It represents that we're not finished, and they're an invitation. We sincerely hope that the work that we've done here will be useful as a foundation for others who may wish to grow and build on this framework and to create new petals of the work. So that brings us to our next steps. What I hope is that we've piqued your interest in this work and that you will be interested in exploring the detail and depth of this framework once it's released within the next month or so. I also hope that I've made you interested in the idea of continuing to grow the framework, of filling in some of the blank petals, of exploring the relevance of the core and the leaves as potential commonalities for this work, and as places and foundations from which this petals can grow. I also wanted to come back to some of what Linda said at the very beginning about our motivation and intent and aims with this work. The flourishing practice model was developed by the field and for the field. And it's important for us that this work is not imposed on agencies or communities. We developed this framework as a resource. People should take what's meaningful and helpful to them and leave aside things that don't fit. With this in mind, what I want to do for our final section of today's presentation is to turn it over to some of our expert working group members who collaborated on the project, on the development of the framework, to give some of their thoughts on this process and of how they may be working, how they may value and use this work.
Thank you, Katrina. I am very happy to introduce everyone to today's panel. So we have 5 of the expert working group members who participated in the development of the framework here with us today. We have Joanne Hargrove, and Joanne has been a social worker for 36 years in various positions, including in child welfare, hospitals, and custody and group homes. For the past 25 years, Joanne has been the Provincial Turning Point Coordinator of IPV programming in Prince Edward Island. Joanne is also a committee member of the Premier's Action Committee on Family Violence. We also have Tracy Myers with us. For over 20 years, Tracy Myers has lived on the unceded traditional territory of the Snuneymuxw Nation, where she advocates and works for women, children, and youth who have experienced violence in their families. More recently, Tracy began facilitating groups with fathers who use violence in their intimate relationships. As the provincial trainer for the BC Society of Transition Houses, Tracy brings her intersectional feminist lens, her passion for justice, and response-based ideas to her support of children's counselors. Johanna Bainton-Smith is a survivor of domestic violence. and has been an educator to health professionals, the justice system, and faith groups on the issue of domestic violence prevention. Johanna is a founding member of the Edmonton, Alberta Community Initiatives Against Family Violence Community Advocates Project, and she is also a retired nurse manager. Nola Mahingan is First Nations from Cowess's First Nation in Saskatchewan. She has a Bachelor of Arts degree in psychology from the school now known as the First Nations University of Canada. Nola has many years of experience with the Yorkton Tribal Council, including as Director of Justice. More recently, Nola became the director of a women's shelter in Yorkton called Safe Haven. Fuad Khan is joining us from Ottawa, Ontario. He works at Counseling and Family Services of Ottawa as a facilitator and psychotherapist. Fuad facilitates the New Directions program and Caring Dads program, working with men and women who have been abusive in their relationships. Fuad is also the founder of Muslim Family Services of Ottawa. So welcome to our panelists. I am going to ask each panelist the same question today, starting with Joanne Hargrove. What was the most significant part of your experience in this project?
Hi, Jenna, thank you for this opportunity, and hi, everyone. I would say the overall significant takeaway for me was a renewed and a refreshed sense of optimism and promise in addressing partner violence. I remember when I began in this field years ago, there was a lot of debate and divide between what were the causes and theories and different approaches. There was a lot of opinions and misunderstandings. And I think slowly we became to recognize that we need more information and collaboration to keep people safe. And I think this project is a tremendous example of collaboration, and that I just have such tremendous respect for the research team and their courage for bringing us all together, the frontline experience from our various groups and aligning that with the literature. And to develop this framework was a fascinating process. And I think what resonates for me in doing the work with Men Who Harm is collaboration. I think that throughout this project, we have talked about assessing risks and managing risks, and you have to have both. You can't have one or the other. It has to be a joint effort. And so in closing, I would just like to highlight that I think this framework has a significant contribution to our work in addressing partner violence. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne. Next, I'll ask Tracy Myers the same question.
Thank you, Jenna. Good morning, everyone. It's an honor. I'm really humbled to be here this morning and to have taken part in this incredible project. I'd really like to thank Mary and Dan for starting us with their words and their song and their prayer in such a good way. I think this opportunity provided me with really many significant firsts for me. So it was the first time to take part in such a well-organized, collaborative, responsive, sustained, and in fact ongoing national conversation with other passionate advocates. It was the first time for me to have the honor and deep responsibility of bringing the voices of children and youth to the table while occupying a seat that was held with equal dignity, value, and respect as the adults at the table. You know, so often the experiences and voices of children and youth are minimized and overlooked, and that includes the anti-violence sector. And it was also the first time, to be honest, to feel such optimism about research. And that's because this research was really conducted and built, you know, on the foundation of the deep knowledge and the refined skills of diverse people from centers and shelters. And when I say front lines, I don't mean it as a metaphor of really this national, in fact, global crisis.
And so I guess just, very few people maybe really acknowledge that children and youth respond in creative, powerful ways to the situation in their lives. And this framework acknowledges that agency and resistance of children, of young people and youth. And I think it'll be a tremendously valuable tool to all those, not just in this sector, but all those adults who walk alongside and support them. So thank you so much for this great honor.
Thank you so much, Tracy, for sharing. Next, I'd like to invite Johanna Bainton-Smith to answer the same question. What was the most significant part of your experience in this project?
Hello, everyone, and following up with all of you, I'm just so excited and to be here. I guess what I wanted to share most is that I really appreciate and felt extremely valued as an individual who participated in this project. And it's important to have people with lived experience who sit at the table with the academics and the service providers to be able to find solutions together as to how we can work to end this terrible thing that is global. Family violence trauma never entirely goes away. As a survivor, I've been told many times, you must be so proud of the fact that you broke the cycle for your family. And I am, but I have 3 children and they are now adults and they have things that have followed them into their adulthood, which they're working on themselves. But it is so important for us to understand that everyone is involved in this, that it is not just a personal problem between 2 people, that it affects our children, our other family members, our siblings, our grandparents, our friends, and it's a larger societal problem. And I think that we need to work together to raise awareness at a community level, provincial level, and this is why I'm so excited and how this was so significant, because we worked with individuals from across the country, from academia and so forth. So I think that part of the things we talk about in the framework is that in order to help survivors and children and make a difference in those who abuse is to have authentic and trusting relationships. And the framework does talk about how when we're working in this area that we do need to be self-reflective and that we need to look at everyone through the trauma-informed lens. So that's all I have to say. I'm just so grateful to have been part of this and have met so many incredible people and hope to stay connected with everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Johanna. Next, we have Nola Mahingan. The same question. What was the most significant part of your experience in this project?
So, hello, everyone. I just want to say thank you to Mary Lou and Dan for the opening and the prayer when we first started out. I was part of the Working with Survivors group, and my biggest takeaway was mostly from the HR point of view. I've been working with this organization for 20 years in different capacities, in different, even different departments. And for 17 of those years, basically, I was part of the interviewing process with my organization. And I sat on many interviews for the past 17 years. I listened to the questions asked and what the expected answers were. It was very hard for us to get to the deep core skills and the answers that I and the others wanted to hear, that we needed to hear. Who was the best person to exude all that we need? Who was the best person to help in the position we were hiring for? Going through this experience helped me focus on not only the theory and practice. This framework has been inspirational and aspirational. It is a tool to help guide us and what skills we wanted to focus on. How can we get to the deep core values, the understanding, the empathy? How should we change our questions because we only skim the top, the surface, and then we take a chance on sometimes not the best fit for the position. For instance, our family support workers here within the shelter, those are very important positions to me. They work directly with our clients. It was also great to hear other point of views, other ideas. It gave me a lot of, I didn't think about that. And that was a really good eye-opener for me. This also assists us in another organization I work with that develops training specifically for us, for shelter workers. Some of the training that were made for us were either a hit or a miss. It didn't always fit for us, or that was stuff we basically already knew. So this framework will help in that. It'll also help enhance the knowledge and skills that are needed to work with us or to collaborate with us. I am very thankful I was part of this learning opportunity, and I just wanted to say thank you.
Thanks very much, Nola. Then we have our final panelist, Fuad.
I think the first thing I would say is I was confused. Katrina called me and said, hey, we want you to be on this expert group. And I'm like, I'm not an expert. So I accepted because I thought, hey, I'm going to learn from other people. I was pleasantly surprised that I did have something to add. I did have something to contribute. So maybe I could be half an expert now, maybe after this process, I'm hoping. I really thought the scope of the project was amazing, as specifically looking at, because I work mainly with the men, looking at that part as far as them as individuals with trauma, cultural differences. So I thought that was really great. I also thought the discussions around recognizing that we are working in silos sometimes. And this is where we actually got everybody together, where I get to hear from Tracy, who works with children, and Joanna, who's a survivor, and to understand those different types. So that was really rare. And I hope that we will continue that. Also to recognize that some agencies are, especially those in the remote areas of Canada, are sometimes working by themselves. And they don't have that opportunity even to debrief with other people when things, for self-care. So I'm hoping that that's something that we can continue as well. So it was an amazing experience, and I hope that that we're able to do this model again. And I really love the fact that this is that they're trying to create a living document that we're going to keep adding to this, right? So there's many different petals that we are going to, I hope that we'll be able to fill out. So I just want to thank everybody on the research team. It was a great experience.
Thank you so much, panelists, for sharing your experiences today. I just want to say the project and the resulting framework was developed because of the contributions of these 5 panelists and all of the other experts who have worked collaboratively so hard over the past 2 years. So thank you for joining us today. At this time, we'll go to the Q&A portion of the webinar. And so I will bring in some questions that have come in. And we'll start with a question for Katrina. So we have a pair of questions, really. First, someone wrote in, viewing from a rural lens, I wonder if you have considered a potentially unintended consequence of specialist terminology. In rural and remote communities, we will never have a single person functioning as an IPV specialist. It will be essential to continue your work in a way that doesn't intimidate generalist providers. And I wanted to pair that with a similar question about generalist service provision. If I could ask you two questions at once, Katrina. So the second similar question is, are there recommendations for practice for clinicians whose work may be more generalist, but undoubtedly have clients who are either survivors or perpetrators of abuse?
Thank you very much, Jenna, and thank you very much, people, for those questions. I grew up in a fairly small rural area, and I just wanted to reflect that I understand what you're saying, and I think it's a good point. One of the things we had to kind of figure out right at the beginning is what was the scope of our framework going to be, and trying to figure out how to title that or how to term that. One of the things that we know from domestic violence death review committees and from work is that addressing violence in relationship is everybody's responsibilities. We need messaging, and we need knowledge in neighbors and friends and families and workplaces and in health and in social settings. What we decided we wanted to do is try to capture the people that were the go-to people. And those go-to people often are in IPV specialist organizations. But I know, for example, in the community that I grew up in, the go-to person for these kinds of questions, that wasn't necessarily their soul, their job, or their title, but they were the recognized person in the community where this is the kind of problem you had. This is who you go to talk to. So what we wanted to do is try to articulate what it is that those people knew and could do and that understood. But and that being said, I really do take your point that it could be using that term specialist has some disadvantages as well in terms of potentially being, I reflect back, Fuad and our initial conversation, I said, no, this is what you do. This is the work you do. And he's like, well, wait a second, this title doesn't fit me. So I do take that point. I think that also thank you for linking the questions, Jenna, because I think it's relevant to think about the fact that not all IPV specialists or not all go-to people for IPV work exist within specific agencies that are devoted only to IPV. There are others who are working in generalist settings who are the people who have these skills, or there might be people who are working in generalized settings who would like to gain and know these skills. And I think that one of the values to me of trying to outline and articulate those skills is to provide a bit of a roadmap to say, okay, if you're in a generalist setting, or you're in a health setting, or if you're in a service and you're working with children and youth, and you find that many of the children and youth have been exposed to violence, for example, what kinds of skills and knowledge do you need? And this can be a roadmap to some of the things that you might want to think about learning and developing in your own practice. Thanks, Jenna.
Thank you, Katrina. Next, I want to call on Linda, if I can. There's quite a number of questions that I'm going to group together again. Probably the most common question people have asked is, where can we find the framework once it's released? And some associated questions there. Is there a paper? Is there going to be a report that provides more of the details that weren't covered today? And will there be a cost to accessing the framework and documents?
All excellent questions, Jenna. So thank you to our participants who posed those questions. First of all, we're really pleased to say that in a few weeks, we will be releasing the report. It will be released in both English and French. And that report will contain a lot of the process pieces and the foundational principles that we worked from, as well as the actual framework and the content. And I know that some people were interested in the flourishing practice model, and yes, it will contain that floral image, and that will be within the document. We'll also make sure that certain aspects like the flourishing practice model, the flower that you saw on your screens when Katrina was presenting, we'll make sure that that in and of itself is a standalone graphic that you can access if that's helpful. So I keep saying the website. So where this will be found is on the Recognizing Critical Expertise website at the Center for Research and Education on Violence Against Women and Children when it is released. And the good news is that everybody who registered for this webinar will get a follow-up email with a link to that document, that is what we call the framework, when it is available. So the additional thing that you will receive is a link to this recording of the webinar, in case that's helpful or in case you have colleagues that weren't able to join. The other thing that I want to say is that we are developing and had a lot of input from our working groups, of the experts that we worked with, in terms of a dissemination plan. So there will be no cost other than if you want to print it and print it on the your own paper. There may be some cost there in your ink in your printer, but there isn't a cost to downloading it. There isn't a cost to accessing it. The part about it, if a document's truly organic and a living document, then it's made to give away. And what we want is as many people as possible in this country, especially and beyond, to be able to access and use the framework in a way that is beneficial to them. And for some people, they may just choose a certain aspect of the framework that's helpful. The whole framework may be, or it may not be helpful at this point. But again, some of those blank petals, as they get filled out and there's groups that come together to work on developing them, then it may have a broader applicability. Thanks, Jenna.
Thank you, Linda. A question now for Angelique. This is a couple of questions in one related to training. So the first question here is, will there be follow-up training opportunities to help develop the identified skills? And the other question that came in that I wanted to pair with that is about scenarios. So somebody was asking if if in the framework there will be scenarios that demonstrate the knowledge and skills.
Both great questions, and absolutely that is on the agenda as a next step. As part of this project, we actually piloted a few what we called scenario-based learning opportunities, where we used simulated client actors that people could practice with to see whether or not for that opportunity for demonstration. So we are working on that, and we're hoping, because what we heard from the members that we were working with is that training options are limited, and that this would be a great opportunity to provide online, freely accessible opportunities for watching people demonstrate the skills, for example, those kinds of things. So yes, that is coming. Probably another funded project as well that we will be trying to do more of those. I hope that answered the question. And there are so many great questions. I wish we had a whole hour just to talk about those.
I just wanted to come back to you, Katrina, for another question that we got a number of. And that relates back to the future work. So a few people were asking One person said, what about elder abuse? How does the framework transfer to that form of violence, or can it transfer? Another person wrote to ask if we would consider work with women who have used abuse and if that's covered in the framework. So I thought you might like to answer those.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, I would love to talk a little bit more and a little bit more about the blank petal part of the framework. One of I think the things that has made this framework what it is, and the value of it is because of the generosity and time taken by all of our expert working group members to come together and have these discussions. I would love to see additional flower petals developed. I would love to see them for elder abuse. And there's actually a whole range and a list of different areas and specialized expertise and different populations that where there's some commonality, I think, or hopefully there's some commonality in terms of thinking about the leaves and the core, but then there's really specific bits of knowledge and skills that you need to have. And to do that work properly, I think what needs to happen is the same kind of process that we need to bring together diverse voices from multiple different parts of the country, from multiple different contexts, to have the discussions and to build on what we've done. So rather than, so I guess what I would say is we had to think very carefully when we started about what we were going to focus on. And in our working group members, we in fact had a number of these discussions along the way. And what we came to is really understanding that this is work that needs to grow. And as it grows, we need to have similar processes to bring together diverse ideas and thoughts and voices to take a look and to hopefully build on and create things that I hope this does, which is that are useful and helpful for the field going forward.
Thank you, everyone, and thanks for the wonderful questions. I, like Angelique said, wish we had all the time to continue answering questions and talking about the framework. I do have to wrap up, however, so I'm just going to bring the webinar to a close before I hand it back over to Elders Mary Lou and Dan Smoke. I just want to thank today's panelists again and to thank the speakers as well. I also want to thank the French language interpreters and the ASL interpreters from the Toronto Sign Language Interpreter Service. Thank you to Elders Mary Lou and Dan Smoke, and to everyone who has joined us today. The Learning Network team invites you to join their webinar on Tuesday, January 25th, when Deanna Jones-Kishig will present Vicarious Trauma, an Indigenous Perspective, Cultural Strengths as the Roots of Resilience for Healing Trauma and Building Worker Wellness. So that's Tuesday, January 25th. And the registration link has just been posted in the chat for that. So now I'd like to call on Elders Mary Lou and Dan Smoke again to close today's virtual gathering.
Hey, we're back, I hope.
Yes, good to be back.
Well, a lot of work went into today's presentation, and there was a lot of information. And this is really, really traumatic work that everybody is involved in. And so I'm hoping that everybody has the opportunity to have some self-care, because you can't carry that trauma around inside you. You'll get sick. You know, our people have ways of handling that kind of trauma. Like we have sweat lodges and we have ceremonies. So, you know, it's a time when somebody who is working in the fields can go into those lodges and arrange a special time for when it's just them, and then they can share what is bothering with, what is inside them and release it. So I hope that that's available to all of you out there, and that you're able to, search in your communities and networks to find if there are places where you can go to receive healing for yourself. Because in order for us to help our people, we have to be healthy too, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, no, I mean, you can't give away something that you don't have.
Yeah. Yeah.
So stands to reason. I mean, I think when we spoke about the Thanksgiving address, we always talk about how we are taking care of every part of creation, and we remind ourselves where we fit in this whole rhythm, this whole cycle of creation. And whenever we take care of it, whenever we take care of each part, like the different times when we have our festivals, say for the midwinter, for example. Well, Mother Earth likes it when we do that for her. Mother Earth likes it when we do a feast for her. When the sap arrives in February, March, usually around March. Well, the sap likes it when we do a feast for the sap, because we are so grateful that the sap is still coming and replenishing us with that first medicine that comes from Mother Earth. So it's all these earth-based ceremonies and ways of knowing are still alive today. And I know that Indigenous peoples around the world are still following them, are still living according to the cycles. And I know that we're starting to become more and more mainstream. So I know that we have had made some inroads into this mainstream road right here in our community of Deshkansy Bay, London, Ontario, also known as the Horn or Antler River. So I just want to share that in closing, that whenever we take care of each part of creation, that part of creation likes it when we do that for them. And so we as human beings are very grateful when we have people taking care of us and looking after our, as Mary Lou said, the circle of care in which we need help. And so when we get that help and that replenishment and that spiritual nurturing, then we appreciate that. We really do appreciate that, because we become energized. And I could sense it in the way that many of you presented today. So I'm just very honored to be part of this. This is great. I'm really glad it's going to be made available to us as well. So because I'm going to be referring to this and looking upon this from time to time, just to remind myself, we walk in two worlds. We walk in the earth-based world, and we walk in the Western world. And the best is when we can combine the two. And that's what we have found to be a good medium, eh, Mary Lou?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So I guess we will close with the Lakota prayer, which is from Mary Lou's people. It's a prayer that, well, not really a prayer, it's like a Thanksgiving as well. But it's an acknowledgement of all creation, really. Just what we've been talking about right from the beginning.
Yeah.
But it's just closing it all off.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. There's a lot of things that are said in this prayer that we need to be reminded about, and to walk in a good way on this journey that we're on. The journey that Dan and I are on, we call it the Red Road. And so that's the journey of our people. And, we also walk in a non-native world,
yes,
but we also walk in the Red Road. So we can have that balance.
Oh, yeah.
And it works good for us.
Yes, it does.
So here's the prayer, and it is by Chief Yellowhawk, who is a Lakota. O great spirit, whose voice I hear in the wind, and whose breath gives life to all the world, hear me. I come before you, one of your children. I am small and weak. I need your strength and wisdom. Let me walk in beauty, and make my eyes ever behold the red and purple sunset. Make my hands respect the things you have made, my ears sharp to hear your voice. Make me wise that I may know the things you have taught my people, the lessons you have hidden in every leaf and rock. I seek strength not to be superior to my brothers and sisters, but to be able to fight my greatest enemy, myself. Make me ever ready to come to you with clean hands and straight eyes, so that when life fades as a fading sunset, my spirit may come to you without shame. Mitakiwasan.
All my relations. Danito. Hi, hi.
Aho,
Thank
miigwech. Miigwech for inviting us to come and
Yes.
help with the presentation today. We're very honored that we were asked to share some of the knowledge that we have learned from our elders. Everything that we share with you, we learned in ceremony, and it's what the elders told us, and they told us what to do. And so that's what we're doing. And now we're passing it on to the younger generation, because it's our responsibility to make sure that the next 7 generations know this knowledge. And so that's what Dan and I do all the time.
Yes, and we want to thank everyone for their words as well, because those words are medicine for our mind, body, and spirit.
Yes.
All my relations.
Hi, hi.
Danito. Hi, hi.
Miigwech. I'll turn it back to Jenna.
Thank you again so much. That's it for today. We wanted to close with that, and that was wonderful. So thank you for being here with us.
Oh.